Welcome to Beyond the Crucible. I'm Warwick Fairfax, the founder of Beyond the Crucible. You got to make a decision. Am I going to lead the fake life or the real life? The false life or the true life? It's a fundamental, life-altering, life-changing decision. But you got to make that decision. Be who you were truly made to be. Be you. Don't be somebody else.
Now, those are words to live by. Words to lean into as you navigate your way beyond your crucible. And here's another one: authenticity. That's the third actionable truth from our Beyond the Crucible Roadmap that we discuss in depth this episode. What does it mean to live with authenticity? What are the roadblocks that can keep you from doing so? And how do you push past them? We discuss that and more this week. So don't touch that dial or push that button or grab that mouse. Well, welcome, friends. We have, this is another episode of what we're calling the series within the show, and that is on the actionable truths that have been born out of what we call the Beyond the Crucible Roadmap. And this is just to catch you up if you've missed the first couple episodes, and we encourage you, if you have, to go back and watch or listen to them. But this is our refreshed way. It's not entirely new, but it's really laser focused of helping you get from your worst day to your greatest opportunity. And that's what we've named the Beyond the Crucible Roadmap. We describe it like this, and I'm going to read directly from my notes to make sure I get it right. How we help people turn their worst day into their greatest opportunity. We provide the essential, actionable truths to inspire hope, enable, and equip them, that's two more, to write their own life-affirming story. So that's what we're talking about here, is to offer you exactly that. Warwick said it many times, we're dealers in hope. We're hoping to deal a little bit today in this episode. The roadmap, just so you know, has been built from our research into how people experience crucibles and what we've learned from our experience and the experiences of all the guests we've had on this show about what it takes to turn trials into triumph. And the most really revolutionary news, as I've said, is that while building this roadmap, we identified the actionable truths of the brand. And to pass along these life-changing truths to you, we're going to do, as I said, a series within the show. Once a month, we're going to, with the exception of when we have our summer series coming up in a few months, but once a month, we're going to do an episode like this, where we're going to talk about what the actionable truths are, why they are true, and more importantly, how you can be actionable about them. That's what the whole purpose of this episode and episodes like this are. So, Warwick, let's set the preamble aside and get down to business here. And let me begin that by asking you this question. Level set for folks for our discussion on this third actionable truth. Why actionable truths, and what do we mean by that?
Yeah, Beyond the Crucible, we focus a lot on how do you get beyond your worst day and lead a life of significance. As you've mentioned, we now have this roadmap, what we're calling the Beyond the Crucible Roadmap, how you go from trial, in other words, crucible, to triumph for a life of significance. And as we've studied, really, what it takes to go from trial to triumph, from crucible to life of significance, we've looked at the research we've done. We've actually looked at my book, Crucible Leadership. We've found there are 10 actionable truths that we believe are catalysts that help you move you along your journey from your worst day to a more positive point in life, to living a life affirming a vision. And so when you're in that state, you're triumphing, you're living a life of significance. And these actionable truths, they've always, in a sense, been there. As I mentioned, they're implicit in my book, Crucible Leadership. But what we're doing now is making these 10 catalysts, these 10 actionable truths, explicit. And so I'm looking forward over this year to really delving into what they are and why they're important to help you move from your worst day to a life of significance.
Well, you've just set up the next question, because why they're important. I'm going to ask you this. They're important because they help us move from setback to significance. But how do they do that, right? Actionable truths. How do these actionable truths help us do that?
We view these actionable truths as accelerators, even enablers, to help you move from your crucible or trial to a life of significance or triumph. And I think you can make a good case that without these actionable truths, you're kind of going nowhere. You're stuck in the pit. You can't move beyond it. And we've already discussed, crucible, self-reflection, and we're going to discuss another, I think, very interesting actionable truth here in a moment. But
good
without
teaser.
These actionable,
good teaser, Warwick. Good.
Without these actionable truths, I think you're stuck. It's sort of like having an engine without oil. You've got to have oil to make the gears work. So these actionable truths, they help you move forward. I'm not sure that it's possible to move forward without these actionable truths. So they're really critical to go from your worst day to a life of significance.
Yeah. And that's, folks, why we're going to continue to talk about these all through 2025. And we are, as Warwick indicated, we're at the next one. And the next one is interesting because it moves us into a different section of the roadmap as well. But in our first two discussions, you may remember, if you haven't, and as I said at the outset, if you haven't seen the first two episodes, please tune in to those. We talked about where the trial begins. So that was the trial phase of the roadmap. And that was your crucible. And then where you begin to move beyond, quote unquote, your crucible is self-reflection. Both of those came under the part of the map which we call trial. We're now moving into a part of the map, the second part of the map, which we call processing. We're moving into processing now. So you've had the trial, you've self-reflected, and now it's time to take some action. So the third truth is what we've determined is one of the critical turning points to begin the forward motion necessary to turn your trial into triumph. And that is authenticity. I should have stopped and said, drum roll, please. Authenticity. Let's do that now. Drum roll, please. Authenticity is the third truth that we're going to discuss in this episode, Warwick. Why is authenticity a critical step after a crucible to begin the journey from trial to triumph?
It's funny, as I reflect on these actionable truths, I'm passionate about all of them. But as we'll get into in a bit, I am really, really passionate about authenticity. It is one of my highest values that I've sought to live my life around. So let's talk about authenticity, and why it's so important. So after we've been through a crucible and we've reflected on what happened, why it happened, what are the lessons learned, what are the things we could have done differently, what can we learn from what was done to us, we're at a point where we're hopefully ready to move beyond a crucible. But a critical step to moving beyond a crucible is authenticity. We need to be our true, authentic selves. And I've certainly found this. It's easy to live a life in which you hide behind a mask, you pretend to be somebody else. But to move forward, we've got to be us. We can't just be somebody else, hide behind it. And, part of that is, we tend to not always want people to know who we truly are. We want to be maybe the life of the party. We just want to be liked. And so we become, the person we think others want us to be. And we lose our sense of self. It's almost like we become an actor. Sometimes with actors, you want to say, who are they really? And, you can lose yourself in your role. We don't want to be actors in our own lives. We want to be ourselves. And so that's one part of it. Another part of it is we need to own how we were authentically made. We need to lean into our unique gifts, skills, and passions. And we need to stop trying to please other people and pursue professions that others may want us to pursue, whether they're friends or family. it's just not really very helpful. I mean, it can often be the case, kids growing up, maybe the mom or dad is a doctor, lawyer, whatever it is. And hey, this is a good profession. And it's like, okay, I guess so. And rather than thinking, well, how was I made? What do I love to do? You tend to pick the safe option, the smart option. It's not a smart option. I'm not even sure it's a safe option. It's not a smart option to be somebody that you're not. That tends not to work. So, those are really the two sides to authenticity. We need to be authentic selves, but we also need to pursue a calling or a profession that's authentically in line, with who we are. We really can't move forward from the pit without being authentically who we are and pursuing a vision that's true to who we are. You really can't move forward without authenticity in both those two facets, the being your authentic self and pursuing a profession that's authentic to who you really are.
Yeah. As you talk about that, it's interesting. Something popped in my head. People say all the time when you're in tough straits, fake it till you make it, right? And I think what we're talking about is the exact opposite of that, right? If you don't fake it, you will make it. I think that's what this actionable truth really brings to bear on this subject, is that don't fake it. Don't wear a mask. Don't run from who you really are. Run into who you really are.
Absolutely, Gary. I think you can also say, if you fake it, you won't make it.
Right.
I'm somebody that's a pretty disciplined person by nature and have high perseverance, but if you try to be somebody that you're not, it creates a lot of dissonance within you, within your emotions, psyche, soul. It's just being somebody you're not creates a lot of anxiety and stress, because it, at your deepest level, it's wrong. It makes no sense. And just to put on an act every day, it's just so draining. It's just stressful.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Yeah.
To be somebody you're not and be in a profession that you hate and don't feel called to, and you're thinking, there's got to be something else. There's got to be something else that makes me more happy and fulfilled than this. It's just like, it's drudgery. I hate my job. It's just not who I am. I guess I got to be sensible. And it's just soul crushing, soul destroying. And so, how do you move beyond your worst day when your soul feels crushed and it's draining you of energy? Rather than a catalyst or an accelerator, you've got a massive brake in which it makes it very difficult to move forward. You're trying to push a massive boulder uphill. That's not a way to move beyond a crucible. You'll tend to roll right back into the pit. The boulder will push you there, if I can mix metaphors there.
Right. Of course you can. You're the host of the show. I am going to, as I do every episode here, I'm going to read the dictionary definition, and not just any dictionary definition, folks. This is the dictionary definition from Webster's first dictionary, what I call Webster's 1828, Noah Webster's very first dictionary. And this is how he describes, actually, authenticity wasn't really a word used, I guess, but authentical is what he describes it as: having a genuine, original, or authority in opposition to what is false, fictitious, or counterfeit, being what it purports to be, genuine and true. So all those things, I think, are exactly what you've been talking about here. That is indeed what it takes to be authentic, to exhibit authenticity.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great word, authentical. I guess we could have called this accelerator authentical.
Yeah. I never heard that word before, so that's funny.
I'm not even sure we use that. It'd be interesting to see if it's in the modern dictionary. But,
right.
But yeah, to be genuine and true, not to be false. We need to be genuine and true to who we are, not false or fake. I mean, it seems so obvious when you just contemplate that dictionary definition. But yet, it is, as we'll get into in a moment, it's challenging to be yourself and to authentically pursue a calling that you feel is in line with who you are. It's challenging, as we'll get into in a moment.
Yeah. I mean, to wear the mask is to wear a mask without eye holes. You can't see where you're going, right? I mean, that it really is what we're talking about
Right.
when we talk about this. So there are, as I said earlier, there are. This is a new stage of the roadmap called processing. We're moving beyond the trial, and now we're processing that trial. And there are two stages two things that come up, two ways it manifests itself as you're processing. The first one of those, Warwick, is overcoming fear. That's the first thing we have to do in processing. So I'll ask you, how does authenticity, or being authentical, as Webster's 1828 says, how does authenticity help us to overcome fear?
It's interesting. One of the big reasons people are not authentic, they put on masks, they don't pursue a career in line with who they truly are. They put on a mask because people fear that if they're truly who they are, if they truly their authentic selves, what happens if people reject who we are? It's one thing if they reject the mask, but if they reject our true self, we feel seen in a sense, but we feel exposed. We feel rejected. We feel they're rejecting our soul. They're rejecting everything that makes us who we are. But we need to make a decision. We need to own our authentic selves and not shrink back from that. For me, it really comes back to my faith perspective. I believe that as humans, we're uniquely made by God in his image, and we're all made differently. We're all maybe a different facet of that image. And so from my perspective, we need to honor that and own that. I think Psalm 139 says we're beautifully and wonderfully made. Well, if we're made a certain way with certain personalities, certain appearance, whatever it is, maybe even certain quirks, I think we all have those quirks, we need to say, okay, that's who I am. And if some people don't like that, oh well, you just, but we need to really make a decision that we're going to be our authentic selves. And, we often live in fear of disappointing others, friends and family. And so that influences what professional calling we pursue. Let's make the safe choice. Let's make mom, dad, and friends, teachers all happy. But, when we pursue a profession that's not true to who we are, we're just miserable. We need to also make a decision that we're going to pursue a calling that's authentic to who we are, that is something that we feel passionate about, is in line with our gifting. And yes, there are some people that may reject that, saying, that's nuts. Your mom or dad's an accountant, a doctor, they have a great business, a good clientele. How can you reject that profession? But, it really reminds me of one of the things we talk about at Beyond the Crucible all the time is having a team of fellow travelers. We need to have people around us that believe in us, that like the true, authentic us. And as we're trying to pursue a professional calling or a vision that's in line with who we are and what we believe, that they will cheer us. And those that don't, well, maybe you don't see them as much. I mean, if they're family, it obviously creates more challenges. If they're friends and they keep kind of pulling us down and wanting us to be who we're not, then maybe, the level of contact maybe shouldn't be as high as it was before. We need to be around people that believe in us, believe in who we are and the path that we're moving towards, so they can really help us be our true authentic selves and pursue a true authentic profession. And those that are naysayers, they're like brakes. They stop us moving out of the pit. So we don't need brakes. We need people who will help us accelerate moving forward. And the right fellow travelers can actually indeed do that.
Right. And I have not told you this beforehand. I just thought about it this morning as I was preparing what we were going to talk about. And I have a real life example of this that dates back 22 years. It was 2003. And you may remember, Warwick, in those days, in the early 2000s, men's retreats were very big in Christian circles. And I went to a men's retreat. And one of the things that was done was friends of mine, guys I knew from work and from childhood and my family, my dad, my brother, they wrote letters to me. And those letters were then presented to all the men in the retreat at some time after they sort of broke us down a little bit. Then they gave us these letters. And I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs from what I said to all the people who wrote me a letter, because it speaks to this idea that you're talking about being authentic to who you are and about fellow travelers affirming that authenticity. So, this is just a section of what I wrote them. Many of the individual things you and other friends and family told me in those letters moved me mightily, which I'm not going to talk about right here and now because crying in the office is kind of frowned on. And I can feel the tears welling up just remembering. But I can and really need to tell you how the Lord used you to minister to me through that. See, this is me saying this now. See, at a very basic level, at the level Jack Nicholson described to Tom Cruise in A Few Good Men, is the place you don't like to talk about at parties. I have always pretty much been ashamed of who I am. As a kid, I heard shut up a lot from my parents because I was always full of questions and conversation. In school, I was a bit of a class clown, and the teachers never really thought a lot of it, even if my classmates did. Through the years, I learned, I guess, that while the personality I had made my peers laugh and kind of like being around me, those in authority over me were displeased by it. I wasn't serious enough to be good. Although that personality has mostly survived in the years since I came to Christ, so has the shame. It's intensified, in fact. So has the sense that I'm just not serious enough to be as good a Christian as this or that person. I've known and enjoyed the friendships of fun I've had in my time here at the place I work, Focus on the Family. But there have always been a part of me, a growing part of me, that suspected I was disappointing God for being too frivolous. That he, like my mom and dad and teachers, was displeased with me for being who I was. And that this has made me so displeased with myself. In that place I don't like to talk about at parties, that I've sort of thought of my shame, that the most a lot of you can do for me is a sort of begrudging tolerance. You endure me, I wrote. And then I read your letters, and what jumped out at me, not what really pierced my heart, wasn't that you really did like me and consider me a friend, but that was nice to know, touching in its own right. But what really set my tears and sobs into overdrive was this. As I read letter after letter and began to see the pattern in what you and others wrote about, that very part of me I've always been so ashamed of, that outgoing fun guy personality, was actually something that folks like you see as a positive. My love of being around people, which I've passed off more often than not as trying to win approval, was actually something the Lord had used to bless others. Far from thinking of me as too glib or flippant or not serious as a person, every person after person, including many of you, recalled moments where you felt I had blessed you and others through just being who I was. And that slayed me. Because I understood in that moment, what I'm trying so hard to still understand now that I've returned to my real life, is that God never has been ashamed of those aspects of my personality. Far from it. In fact, he made me that way. 22 years ago, thinking that my authentic self wasn't good enough, and my fellow travelers affirmed that indeed it was. Miraculous.
Gary, that is so powerful. There's so much to reflect on. I think it's extremely helpful to talk about this. Just growing up, that sense of shame, hey, I'm sort of the class clown, so to speak. My buddies like it. The teachers feel like, yeah, this guy's not going nowhere. I mean, class clown, he's not serious enough. He's not going to work hard. He's just like, you don't tend to think of class clowns winning the Nobel Prize or something or going somewhere. You just feel like they're funny, but yeah, probably not end up anywhere too helpful. That's sort of the notion. And those fellow travelers saying, well, we like you, Gary, because of that class clown, fun-loving guy. That's what we like, and you can still be funny and actually achieve things as you have. You did then and you do now. So I guess 20 plus years later, imagine you were writing that letter again.
Right.
Would it be different? I mean, you'd be thankful, but would you still feel like, gosh, I still have this sense of shame and I'm just less than, and there are other Christians that achieve more than I do? Or how would that letter differ if you're writing it today versus 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think part of stepping into my authentic self and being comfortable in my authentic self, right? Because sometimes masks can feel comfortable. So being comfortable in my authentic self, I think I know now that I don't compare myself to others in that way. Are there times that I'm like, ooh, I probably shouldn't have cracked that joke, or I should have maybe been serious at that time. I mean, there are still moments like that, but I don't think that there's this wholesale kind of disregard or lack of affinity or affirmation from those around me because of that. So I have not just come to peace with my authentic self. I have come to understand that my authentic self is in fact has been a positive in my life. So that's flipped. And it's the point of what we're talking about here. You have to embrace your authentic self to overcome a crucible, because that's the way that you're going to go from trial to triumph. I was sort of bouncing through trials and challenges, and I would come out on the other side, but I still had never really embraced that part of me. I lived it. I didn't hide it, but I just sort of thought it wasn't good enough. And I think now I know from my own perspective, helped by fellow travelers who wrote me these letters, which I have in that folder I was holding, that it is good enough, because that's who I was created to be.
So I'm sensing that word you use, which is a very strong word that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, the word shame. Would it be true to say that that's not really part of your vocabulary anymore as you think about who you authentically are? That you're not ashamed to be Gary Schneeberger?
No, not at all. I mean, are there things that I do and say and that are just sort of antithetical to who I am at my core that maybe brings in like sadness? Yes. But that aspect of that aspect of my authentic self, who I am authentically, does not bring me shame. It brings me actually comfort. It brings me hope. It brings me the ability to endure crucibles. So I don't know that that some of the crucibles since then, in the last 22 years, could have been overcome if I still thought in this kind of that I was a mess. I don't think I'm a mess in that way anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's so powerful. We should never be ashamed of who we are, and I'll get into more of my story later, but yeah, in some ways I can relate to what you're saying, as we'll get into. But we should never be ashamed to be authentically who we are. But really, that's sort of the point of this question, is we tend to fear being authentic selves, because if we are, people won't like us.
Right.
People will be ashamed to be with us, or almost like in the Bible, sort of like a leper, unclean,
right.
Go away, live on the edge of on town. Don't be where everybody is. Just go and be separate so that we don't have to see you. That's that abiding sense of shame that we can have. But that's where we just need to, realize that we're perfectly made by God from my perspective, and not be ashamed of who we are. Right.
And it has been, so thank you for indulging me as I take up a whole lot of time of the episode and talking about that, but it just hit me this morning, and I have all these letters nearby in my files. And I was like, that is exactly what we're going to talk about. And here's exactly what else we're going to talk about, folks. There's two parts to this processing. And the second part of that processing, Warwick, is committing to change. Again, talk a bit about being aware of, but being resistant to change. Why is committing to change so important here?
Yeah, Gary, committing to change is tough. Change is tough and it's typically scary. Ironically, I'm somebody that's lived in a bunch of different places: Australia, where I'm from, the UK, New York, Chicago, Boston, a bunch of different places, partly education. And I'm somebody that actually does not like change, even though I've done a lot of different things. So I certainly get the fact that change is tough and it's typically scary. So especially when we want to try to be our true authentic selves and lead our authentic calling. But really, we have to put a line in the sand and make a commitment to change. We've got to move beyond, our crucible. And we're not going to do that unless we're true to who we are and authentic to the calling in our life. It's really one of the most critical and fundamental decisions we're going to make in life. So you might be scared. You might be thinking, gosh, are people going to like me if I'm my true authentic self and pull down the mask? And if I lead a life, a profession that's in line with who I authentically am made to be and my passions and gifting, is that going to work? There's a lot of fear, but you just got to make a commitment. As we often say, one step at a time. The first step is often the biggest. But we've got to make a commitment. I am going to be who I am and pursue a calling that I feel led to. And hopefully you'll have some fellow travelers to encourage you, but you got to make a decision. Am I going to lead the fake life or the real life, the false life or the true life? It's a fundamental life-altering, life-changing decision, but you got to make that decision. Be who you were truly made to be. Be you. Don't be somebody else. I think some comedian or some wise person has said, everybody else is already taken, so why not be me? Or something to that effect, which I think is, I forget who it was, but it's a very profound statement. There's a whole bunch of other people. Let them be them. Good for them.
Right.
But you be you. You got to make that commitment. That's really a critical first step in being authentic. Just make that commitment that you got to be you.
Right. And we've reached now, folks, my favorite part of these shows, and I will put on my authentic identity as class clown to say we're going to examine patient zero of Beyond the Crucible, and that's our host, Mr. Warwick Fairfax, because Warwick's story and the things he went through from trial to triumph really do. He before we ever called them actionable truths, before we ever knew that we could think of what actionable truths might be, Warwick lived these things out as he moved from his trial to his triumph. So let me ask you this, Warwick. How did authenticity help you truly begin to move beyond your crucible?
Authenticity is one of my highest values, but it was a challenge. In some ways, ironically, I could relate to what you're saying, Gary, about shame. I don't know if I would have used that word, but as listeners know, I grew up in a very large 150-year-old family media business. And in Australia, there's a strong egalitarian philosophy, which is obviously good in many ways. But there's a thing called the tall poppy syndrome, which basically means that if you're successful in anything other than sports, and Australia is a sports, mad country. Right. If you're good in business, the arts, any profession you can think of, it's like, so you think you're better than us. Right. It's like, if you're successful. And so ironically, I say ironically because, I felt this, and it's ironic because I went to, a private boys' school in Sydney where I grew up. And, the school fees were high, if not very high. So the kids in that school, the boys in that school, they were like sons of stockbrokers and doctors and lawyers. They were not impoverished, So, but yet they would say, well, Warwick, you think you're better than us, don't you? And anybody that knows me now or back then, I have my issues, but that was never one. I was never a kid that run around boasting. I'd be more just hiding and saying nothing. There's no truth to that allegation. And so I would just be mortified. No, I don't think so. They'd say, how many cars did your dad have and how much money? And my dad did have a few cars, one of which was actually an Aston Martin that was almost identical to the one that James Bond drove in Goldfinger.
So did it have missiles that popped out when he pushed the button?
Not that I know of.
Oh, okay, good.
There might have been one time when my dad said, "Don't touch that button." But I don't know why he said that. I have no idea.
That's awesome. That's
good
awesome.
job I didn't. But yeah, there was just this sense of, I don't know. I don't think I would have used the word shame, but maybe it would be appropriate of, I didn't want to be seen as somebody that was different than other people. And just there was this sense of huge expectations that I'd have to fill in terms of one day being in a leading position within the family company. I was not particularly athletic growing up. I wasn't terrible, but I was sort of the last one picked for, I guess you call it tag here, we call it tip in Australia, whatever the game was. So there was a lot of reasons over the years in which I felt like, gee, I'm not as athletic as the next guy, and I'm not a handyman, because when you grow up the way I grew up, you don't do fix-it projects yourself. You have people that do that for you, obviously. Even if that wasn't the case, I still wouldn't have been good. I'm not like a crafty kind of guy with the wood shop, and it's just not what I enjoy. So there's plenty of things that I would have thought, I'm just, I just wouldn't have felt great about who I was in that sense. Despite the fact that, I went to Oxford, Harvard Business School, and I suppose that helped a bit. But it's easy to look at the things you don't have and wish you were that. So I guess back to sort of authenticity, one of the reasons authenticity is one of my highest values is, as I kind of say in my book, I, in a sense, grew up in the world of the inauthentic. Again, my parents were prominent folks, given that my dad, for most of my growing up, was chairman of John Fairfax Limited, this iconic media company that had newspapers, magazines, newsprint mills, radio stations. It had the equivalent in Australia of the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. So my parents would have parties with, my mother was pretty social, so she loved organizing these things. They'd have parties with ambassadors, prime ministers, politicians, leading business figures, and occasionally even visiting folks from Hollywood. And I guess because my parents saw me as the next generation, that even at a young age, 10, 12, or what have you, I'd be invited to attend these parties. They wanted me to be around and just see what that world was like and just, be ready for my future. And so often people would just try and impress each other with how brilliant they were, the deals they'd done, the important people that they knew,
right.
In Europe or Hollywood or wherever. And it was just so fake. Ever since, I've just had no desire to be around people that want to boast like that. I want to be around real people. So I don't really hang out in those circles.
Right.
I didn't voluntarily hang out in those circles when I was growing up, but I don't choose to. So I really became allergic to the world of the inauthentic. But what's interesting is it's not like I was authentic. Okay, so don't you have to be inauthentic or authentic? Well, I guess I found a third way, which is I put on a mask. And so it's not like I pretended to be somebody else. It's just nobody knew what I was thinking. In fact, after my $2.25 billion takeover of the family company, which I think people would know did not work out, during those takeover years when I was in control of this massive 4,000-person company, there was an article written in an Australian magazine, and I was, in fact, on the front cover. And the title of the article, and again, it was on the front cover, was "The Man Behind the Mask," and had this cartoon of me with this mask. And what this article was saying is that people found me very difficult to know. In fact, some of my advisors at the time said, Warwick's the hardest person I've ever got to know. He's inscrutable. So, after my crucible of the bankruptcy of this 150-year-old family media company happened, and it happened under my watch, I had a lot to think about. I moved to the U.S. because that's where my, wife is from, and we've lived here since the early 90s. And I think over time, I gradually pulled down the mask. Of course, it was easier because in the U.S., nobody knew who I was. So it was easier sort of to be me and be a little less paranoid about opening my mouth on, not so much opinions, but just being me. So it just sort of gradually happened over time. And the second part is over time, I gradually pursued a calling that was authentic to me. I mean, it wasn't easy because, who was I? I knew I wasn't this corporate raider, CEO, big business guy, but who was I? I probably realized that I was more like my father than I was willing to admit, who was sort of would have been a better philosophy professor, was very reflective. I don't know that I've ever had a desire to be a philosophy professor, but that reflective aspect of his nature, I think that was there. And so, really what I am is a reflective advisor, but I didn't quite realize that through most of the 90s. So there were several steps on the journey. I worked in finance and marketing strategy for an aviation services company in Maryland, where we live. And one of the key steps for me in finding out who I authentically was I went to a woman that did mid-career executive coaching. And she said, Warwick, you have a great profile to be an executive coach. So I've become a certified international coach, federation executive coach. But, when she said that, I felt like it made sense. And I remember, I think it was 2003, I went to my first International Coach Federation conference in Denver. And I felt like these are my people. They were very curious, non-judgmental. They wanted to know who I was, and I wanted to know who they were. And that was maybe the turning point, I would say, in me finding my true, authentic self. I didn't quite realize it at the time. In fact, we've talked earlier about making a commitment to change. One of the key turning points in my life, I remember we had Michael Lindsay, is the president of Taylor University. When my kids went, he wrote a book, Hinge Moments. And that was a hinge moment for me. It wasn't a crucible, but I made a critical decision. And that really came, I just felt the still small voice of God while I was working in the aviation services company. And I felt like God telling me, Warwick, you're playing small. You're not living in light of who I made you to be. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with working in finance and marketing strategy for an aviation services company, but there was a lot more that I could give. And I wasn't doing that out of maybe fear or ignorance or what have you. And so when you feel like God telling you you're playing small, you're not being who I designed you to be, it's like, wow, okay, that was a wake-up call. Right. And I made that commitment. Okay, I'm not going to apologize for being me. I don't think anybody should apologize for being them. And so that the first key step was becoming executive coach. And after that, one thing after another kept moving forward because I was curious and asking good questions and doing some executive coaching. I was invited to be on 2 nonprofit boards, the elder board of my church, a non-denominational evangelical church in Maryland where we still go, and my kids' Christian school. After a talk in church as a sermon illustration, I decided to write a book about what happened growing up, my thoughts on leadership and life. And that led to a brand that we called at the time Crucible Leadership, that we now call Beyond the Crucible, and led to this podcast. But that key hinge moment, that key turning point was that moment where I felt like God saying, you're playing small, you're not being authentic to who you truly are. And that executive coach that said, you have a great profile to be an executive coach. I don't do as much executive coaching anymore, but it was a key turning point. I didn't realize at the time that led me to where I am now. So, this wasn't an easy journey, but I just made that decision that I'm going to be my true, authentic self. I'm going to pursue an authentic calling that's true to who I am. It's interesting. This family media business was founded by my great-great-grandfather, John Fairfax. It was his true, authentic calling, but it was not my true, authentic calling.
Right.
Really, as we're dialoguing about shame and all of that, I think like you, I'm in a much better position. I'm not as athletic as some people, but I have reasonable hand-eye coordination. I'm not as bad as I might think I am. I play tennis with my kids. Yeah, I don't enjoy building decks. So what?
I don't either.
Yeah, I can assemble IKEA furniture. I'm pretty reasonably tech savvy. I'm not terrible I just need directions, but just don't ask me to build a deck. And so I'm comfortable with who I am.
As you were telling that story, when did you say you went to the International Coach Federation conference?
I think that was 2003.
You know what's interesting about that work? That's exactly the date of that letter I read, was in 2003.
Wow.
So we both, right? We both sort of found the truth of our authenticity at roughly the same time. That's amazing.
So in the word of, again, Michael Lindsay's book, just as that was a hinge moment for me, because it probably wasn't necessarily a crucible, was that a hinge moment for you? Was that a turning point?
For sure.
Those letters in 2003?
Yeah, it was, I'm not all these bad things I thought I was. It was absolutely a hinge moment. So, wow, how amazing that I feel like just dropping the anchor on this one and ending it, but we can't do that yet, folks, because I want to ask you, Warwick, like I do at the end of every one of these episodes. What's your one takeaway for folks who've listened and watched us talk about the actionable truth of authenticity? What's the one takeaway you'd like them to walk away with from this conversation?
If you want to bounce back from your crucible, if you want to get out of the pit, if you want to move beyond your crucible, you have to be your true, authentic self. Don't be ashamed of who you are. Don't listen to the boys and girls at school, mean boys, mean girls. Kids can be really brutal, and it's worse today with social media, which, we didn't have when we were growing up. But you've got to put a stake in the ground, make a commitment to be who you are. Don't be afraid of being your true, authentic self. And don't be afraid of pursuing a calling that's authentic to who you are and that's unique to who you are. I think God made us all uniquely with our own unique set of qualities, strengths, things we might think are weaknesses, or just things maybe not as good at as some, with their own quirks that some may find charming, some may find annoying. We might find annoying, but it's just who we are, quirks and all. Just, accept, do more than accept. It's like if we're made this way by God or however we think it works, then be true to who you are and pursue a calling that's unique to you. And, if you don't do this and try to be somebody else and try to pursue a calling that's not in line with your gifting and passion, I think rather than moving beyond your crucibles, you will lead, to sort of paraphrase in a different way, It's a Wonderful Life, you will lead a crucible life. You'll be wanting to jump off the bridge, the snowy bridge, like every day. That'll be a normal day because you will live a crucible life. It'll be one crucible after another. Life is tough enough. But if you follow a calling that's not unique to you, that's not authentic to you, if you try to be somebody else and not your true authentic self, you will create crucibles. Rather than having to just endure the ones that come at you, you'll be creating them. I mean, why live a life journeying from crucible to crucible and mistake to mistake and then creating crucibles? It makes no sense. Don't do it. Be your true authentic self. Live a calling that's authentically you And you'll have a much greater chance of living a life of significance, going from trial to triumph, from your worst day to a life of significance. Living an authentic life is an accelerant, is an accelerator. Try to be somebody else is the opposite. It's a massive break. It's a boulder that will tend to stop you getting out of the pit. And one crucible after another will tend to whack you right back in the pit. You're creating pit after pit. It makes no sense. So do yourself a favor. Be you, be your true authentic self, and pursue an authentic calling that's unique to you.
And your authentic calling is as an airplane pilot, because you've just landed the plane in our conversation, Warwick. Bravo. Another really great discussion. Folks, this is just the third actionable truth we'll be discussing in depth this year. Each month we'll take a look at another one and how it's connected to the previous one that builds out our Beyond the Crucible Roadmap. And the next time we will be discussing, drum roll please, Scott, faith. That's what we're going to be talking about. And you'll want to stay tuned for that, folks, because we have a definition of faith that's a little bit different than you might expect. So stay tuned. That's coming up. So until next time that we are together, please remember this. We want you to believe these truths, but we also want you even more to act on them. That's why they're actionable truths, because that's what's going to help you along the roadmap from trial to triumph. And we will see you next week. Welcome to a journey of transformation with the Beyond the Crucible assessment. Unlike any other, this tool is designed to guide you from adversity to achievement. As you answer a few insightful questions, you won't just find a label like the helper or the individualist. Instead, you'll uncover your unique position in the journey of resilience. This assessment reveals where you stand today, the direction you should aim for, and crucially, the steps to get there. It's more than an assessment. It's a roadmap to a life of significance. Ready? Visit beyondthecrucible.com. Take the free assessment and start charting your course to a life of significance today.